In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. We've got another exciting show for you this week. We're going to take a look at the Chris Edwards signing, which I think is one of the most exciting signings we've had in a while, and it hasn't been talked about much, so I'll explain to you why it is. I think this one stands out even more than the McLeod Bethel Thompson signing that we talked about last week, and some of the other high-profile signings we've seen over the last 2 years. We're also going to give you our version of the CFL Power Rankings, and I say our version because we've got a little bit of a twist to it. And that's all coming up on today's episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Just a reminder before we get going, you can check out all our work at xsandargos.com, and you can follow me at Ben_Grant. You can follow the show at X's and Argos, and you can follow JB at X's and Argos JB. So the Chris Edwards signing, JB, this to me was another example, like we talked about last week when we went over some of the situations that have come up since Pinball and Murphy took over, where they saw even just a sliver of weakness and said, we've got to address this. I'm not sure there was a huge weakness in the defensive secondary, but it was pretty clear when I talked to Coach Bell a few weeks ago that it was hard to see the full picture because we had so many different players who weren't necessarily standouts at one single position. You had guys that could go all over the place. And so when I was talking with Coach Bell, I mentioned, I don't know how to make my depth chart. We've got Alden Darby, who I think is a great free safety, but he could also play boundary corner. You've got Shaq Richardson, who could be boundary corner, boundary half. He could play Sam. What's Robertson Daniel going to do? He could fit into one of four places. And so what this Chris Edwards signing does is it gives us a guarantee at Sam. Chris Edwards is a terrific Sam linebacker, and that is really the only position that he's seen success at in the CFL. And so I think we can lock him in right now as the Toronto Argonauts Sam in 2021, which is huge because now that helps us slot in everybody else in the defensive secondary. So that means if we're not looking at Robertson Daniel as a Sam backer, that frees him up. And I think the next best spot for him is probably boundary corner. He was a fantastic shutdown corner in college. He hasn't really had too much of an opportunity to do that in the CFL, but that goes back to something that really takes advantage of his skill set. So I expect to see Robertson Daniel over at the boundary corner. And that allows us to create what Coach Bell talked about a few weeks ago with us, is this triangle of trust. Three guys that he has this full faith in that can be the triangle between free safety, field half, and boundary half. And we know how much he loves Shaq Richardson. I think Shaq's probably going to be penciled in now as that boundary half. We know he loves Alden Darby. I do too. I love him at free, and I think Coach Bell does as well. So he's up top. And then I think we're looking at Chris Humes as our field half. Chris Humes was a guy that Coach Bell was excited to talk about coming right into the interview a couple of weeks ago. And so I know he's somebody that's on Coach's radar. So if that's sort of the triangle, we've got Edwards at Sam, we have Robertson Daniel over at boundary corner, and that leaves us with a lot of options for field corner. And we could go with one of our Canadians there. We could see Cresden Butler there. That's sort of the last position that I think is really up in the air. And then that's a really nice veteran group to start with. And I'm not saying that that's where the season ends, because I think you've got all these guys that we talked about when we did our DB show a few weeks ago, Treston Deku, Mike Tyson, James Sample. All of those guys are going to be fighting for those starting spots. And maybe by the end of the year, they've taken over some of these veterans, but what a nice thing in week one to be able to put out a full defensive secondary of experienced CFL players. No question marks out there.
It was the last area that they had to add to. It was really the only question mark left. It speaks to their it speaks to their desire to play football this year. And I think when we look at the power rankings, I think it again solidifies a team that in no way looks like the team that left the field in 2019. I mean, the team has been completely turned over. And of course, it's not easy to bring in random guys from random places and turn it into a cohesive defense. But I think the talent level, the veteran knowledge, the coaching staff that they've put together all point to what should be a dominant defense in the CFL, in my opinion. Absolutely top 3 defense.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing is, and I think we can say this with some similarities with the offense as well. I think we know that there are great players on paper all across the lineup, up and down. There are great players. The problem is, like you said, they haven't had that chance to gel. There is no chemistry necessarily there. There are little bits here and there. This guy's played with this guy, like we know Edwards has played with Creston Butler, for example. We know that Shaq and Darby have played together. We know that Shaq's played with Robertson Daniel, but they haven't all played together, and they haven't all been coached by these specific coaches. So it is going to take time. And that's the one thing that makes me nervous with the shortened season. I was really excited about an 18-game schedule when we knew that there were going to be some growing pains. 14 leaves a little bit less room for you to get off to a slow start. And so we are in a little bit more of there's a bit more of a sense of urgency now with a 14-game season. We've got to get this thing rolling quickly. So camp is going to be vitally important. But even more to the point, but that's even more important to have all these veterans out there that we can now put out there. We don't need to start any rookies. So what a great position to be in.
I mean, it is so hard because football is a sport that demands practice. It's not like baseball. And in some ways, even hockey, like you can't play football without practice. It is a sport that lives and breathes on installation and practice time on the field. And that's going to be a big challenge for a lot of teams this year because they're not going to get a lot of practice time and a lot of lead up into the season. And, the preseason is so vital for install and everything being rushed. I think that it is going to be a wild card. I think when we get to the power rankings, I'll talk about it, but there's no doubt that will be a challenge for the Argos, but having veteran players, I think, reduces the issue where, yes, they may not know this exact scheme, but they've been around long enough and in enough schemes to know, there's a certain core similarity to all of the schemes. So I do think having the vets will help with them being able to get to quick shorthand with each other faster than a young team could.
Let me give you a quick scouting report on Chris Edwards. So he's probably, like I said, penciled into that Sam spot. One of the problems with him in the NFL is that he was sort of a tweener for his skill set, but he covers so well, but he's got that sort of hybrid linebacker size. And so they wanted to use him as a safety, and he really isn't that. The perfect position for him is as a cover backer, and that's why the CFL is a perfect fit for him. He's 6'2", 217. He's really fast for his size. He's good in coverage, especially against bigger defenders. And that's where I think he's going to match up extremely well against that third receiver to the field side. When they throw in bigger bodies, especially, he can cover running backs quite well out of the backfield. A good tackler, a guy that creates turnovers in his tackles. You watch him hit, like as he's bringing the guy to the ground, he's always trying to rip that ball away or punch the ball away. I love to see that in a defensive player. And then the thing I like maybe most about him is that he diagnoses plays really quickly. He doesn't let quarterbacks move him around. He doesn't get baited into following a crossing route, knowing that something's probably coming in behind him. And I think maybe one area that BC didn't use him a lot, but you see on his film when he played with the Vandals, is that he's a really effective blitzer. He's great at disguising his blitzes. I would love to see them use some of that. Something, as I said, BC didn't really get to do, but I'm hoping that Coach Young, with this aggressive defense that we're now anticipating seeing, calls on Edwards to blitz. and we see some more heat coming out of that Sam position. I think that would be a pretty cool element that he might be able to add.
Definitely, especially when you look at the blitz potential. If you look at the pass rushers that we have at end, if you look at linebacker-wise, if they're able to bring Cassar along, the line is going to be, it's going to be alert all day. And so that's a great opportunity to bring heat from a zone because they are concentrating on the ends, concentrating on the backers not flying through. It's a perfect position for him to be in as to Sam if you're getting heat from other positions. So I think that really plays nicely.
So we'll transition now into our first power ranking of the season, and I think that we need to explain the system that we're going with. We've never tried this before, so this may be a catastrophic failure, but I think it's going to be kind of fun. So essentially, you don't think it's going to fail? I think this may go quite badly, but we'll see.
No way.
Well, I don't know, because I don't know how similar your list is to my list. So to give you sitting at home an idea of what we've done here is JB and I have both put together our individual power rankings of the teams in the CFL. And we've decided that we're going to count down from 9 to 1, alternating, taking turns at nominating a team for the next position, and then justifying our selection there. So it is possible in this setup that JB may feel like the worst team in the league is someone that I had third or fourth, in which case I can no longer use them third or fourth. They're off the board now. So we may end up with a bit of a mishmash of a power ranking, but it may work out perfectly. We'll see how in sync we are at this stage of the season. All right, so do you want to start first at 9, or do you want me to take a go?
Sure. My first team at the bottom of the league has to be the Red Blacks. I know that might feel biased because we're Toronto and we like to dunk on Ottawa, but the Red Blacks are not good at football.
I have them at 9 as well. That to me was really obvious. They just don't have a lot of talent. I really like Paul LaPolice, but this is a team that looks like they've been assembled to rely on a ball control offense, except they just don't have the defense to complement that. You can't be a ball control offense if your defense is letting up 40 points a game, and they may.
It looks like it was assembled in the dark.
It does a little bit. There's just no continuity to it. You're like, what is this? Why is this guy even here? This doesn't really make sense to me. And so they're coming off just an absolutely dreadful season. We know 3 of our 4 wins in 2019 came against the Red Blacks, and 2 of them weren't even games. So just looking at
those games were so terrible.
They were not great football games, but it was nice to be able to cheer, and I think one of them was on country night when we got those cowboy hats,
and the weather was generally very nice.
Beautiful weather, so we can't complain about that. But yeah, the Red Blacks, they just haven't done enough to adding Paul LaPolice on his own. Matt Nichols, it'll be interesting to see how he fares. He doesn't have the same talent around him that he's had in his other stops, certainly coming from Winnipeg. So it'll be interesting to see how he does too.
It is an interesting aspect for Toronto fans too to look at. I mean, this is not the Wayne Gretzky trade, but this is, Arbuckle for Nichols, that they wanted their Winnipeg guy and we wanted the Calgary guy, and they are all in on him and we are all in on ours, and let's find out who is the better quarterback, or who performs better this year. I'm really interested. It's a nice little side plot to make the occasional Ottawa game more entertaining to watch.
At number 8, I have the BC Lions, and this was tough for me because I don't feel you can ever count out a team with Mike Riley and Brian Burnham. We remember that 55-8 disaster of a game last October where Mike Riley threw for 5 touchdowns. I think 3 of them went to Burnham. And I like Rick Campbell as well, but I just don't think his coaching and Riley's arm and Burnham's hands are going to be enough to overcome the other problems on this roster, which are, pretty much everywhere else. And they've got, undoubtedly, they're going to have to go up against more Western teams than East. We don't know what the schedule looks like yet, but if they're having to play multiple games against what is a very talented West. I think BC is going to be in trouble right away.
I did look at BC for 8. They do have more raw talent than Ottawa does. They also have a brand new coaching staff coming in. They didn't make really any huge additions in the offseason. They didn't really lose a ton. I think that they lost Micah Johnson, which isn't great. And I thought that they did a nice job of adding some nice DBs. Marcus Sales is a player. So that's where I give them the nod over Ottawa, because Ottawa didn't add anybody as talented as that to their team. And you have to believe BC is going to figure it out. I just think they're gonna bounce back. Coming in number 7, not really much of a surprise, I suppose, when you look at the league, is the Alouettes. They were 10-8 in 2019, so people might be surprised by that. I think that I felt maybe they weren't as strong, but that's not a bad record. Kahari Jones is back as their coach. They have a new DC, but they have some continuity going there. They lost Mwamba to us. They got a nice offensive lineman from Ottawa, Lausanne Sagan. I thought that they haven't added a ton, but I think that they are a good-looking team in terms of being average. I don't think they're going to be great. I don't think they're going to be terrible. We'll see what Standback looks like, the running back who's coming back. If he can be what he was, I think that they're probably right around 10-8 again. So I have them there. I thought about other teams, but I still think that they didn't really add enough for me to see them improving into the next tier.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with Montreal at 7. They've got a lot of guys I like that I'm excited to cheer for. I think it's going to be fun to watch, like Montreal-Toronto games. There's a lot of former Argonauts on this team, and not necessarily the ones from 2019 that you don't really want filling up your roster. But I like Mario Alford, Tony Washington, Natea J, who we never got to see, is now in Montreal. That upsets me. Regi Sivasu, Tyler Capina. So I'll be excited. I hope Montreal loses to us by missing a long field goal. I think that will help justify everything in my mind. They've got Chris Aki back after his 1 year in Toronto where no games were played.
That team is definitely a friend of the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. These are guys that we like and are excited to see do well, just not when they're playing Toronto. I think this is going to come down to Verdon Adams. He's going to need to carry the team. And I think most of their wins are going to come from the strength of his playmaking ability and his arm. And he just wasn't consistent enough. And he was on and off the field, of course, as well, which didn't help. So if he can have a fully healthy season and he can get a bit of consistency, maybe they can be better than this. But for now, I think 7 is the place they belong. Moving on to number 6. So this one, I don't know. I don't know how to read you on this, because you may be way off on this one as far as I'm concerned, or maybe I'm way off as far as you're concerned. I expect to be way off as far as most of our listeners are concerned.
I think 6 through 2 is a bit of a coin toss.
So I have Calgary at number 6, and this is tough because it's Calgary, and you don't generally do very well betting against Calgary. They've still got Bo Levi-Mitchell. You still got Coach Dickinson. They've got a bunch of their core pieces in place, and they're just a team that doesn't put bad years out there historically. But that said, they've lost so many pieces. Just to the Argos alone, they've lost Eric Rogers, Joanne Brescison, Kadero Law, Robertson Daniel, and then Coach Dinwiddie and Coach Bell also. So I just feel like this team is ready to take a step back on both sides of the ball. And so I just didn't see enough ads with all those losses that I've cited and more. I just didn't see enough ads, and I think they're resting on their laurels a little bit. I don't know if this is going to be a team to beat in the West, so I have them at 6.
I was not a huge fan. I mean, I do. I think Toronto took a lot of talent from Calgary. I think it's hard to dismiss Calgary because of their pedigree and the coaching and the court. I mean, when you have a great coach and you have a great quarterback, you're going to be in good shape. So I could argue a little bit about that, but I agree they lost a lot of talent to us. I think Wynton McManus is a big loss for them at linebacker. I think the coaches that they lost is good. That happens to good teams. Good teams have their coaches rated, and sometimes that cause. So I mean, if Toronto's going to be good, that means our Calgary guys are going to be good. So that must mean Calgary's not going to be as good. I think those two are interrelated. So I'm with you on this.
And I think if there's one so far of our bottom four that we've got here, if there's one that is going to make us look foolish, it may be this one, because again, you don't you don't do well betting against Calgary. But
you have a great coach and you have a great quarterback, and that is a lot when it comes to football. So,
but I just don't see it everywhere else.
I agree. It's good. Well, it'll test that theory. For me, number 5 is Edmonton. They have a new coach. And I think that although the Argos also have new coaching, I do think that is a bit of an issue for them in terms of getting on the same page. They were 8-10 in 2019, so not overwhelming. They added Darrell Walker at receiver, which is nice.
They actually added Toronto's entire receiving core from 2019, with the exception of S.J. Green. I was just like looking up and down their roster. They've got Armani Edwards, Rodney Smith, Jimmy Ralph. It's just S.J. Green that's missing, so Greg Ellingson can fill in for S.J., and that's Toronto's 2019 receiving core.
Yeah, so I mean, again, we saw how that went. I mean, I think that they probably are a little more set at quarterback than we were in 2019. I think that Coach Elizondo is obviously a very good coach and has a great track record, and I think that Edmonton is a team that has traditionally been a powerhouse in the league, and I think that they are probably ready to improve. I just don't see from who they've added how they're going to go from 8 wins to 11, 12, 13 wins, which would be top 5 in the league. I think the additions they made and the new coaching staff will improve that team. I just don't think it's going to improve the team beyond 10 wins.
I think, I don't know. Who knows how it's going to go, but I think they've got some really solid pieces. I like their O-line. I think they've done some good stuff there. I'm a big fan of Derek Dennis, and I think they've shored up that positional group quite well, and they're going to be able to give Trevor Harris some time. Trevor Harris is a great quarterback. Darrell Walker is a great receiver. Armani Edwards did everything that was asked of him. I like Rodney Smith, despite the fact that I'm not sure exactly still to this day how he fits on a CFL field, but he was a touchdown machine late in the season against those Red Blacks. So you never know. And Greg Ellingson obviously has a really good connection with Trevor Harris already. So they may be able to put up enough points. And their defense has enough pieces that have stayed around that there's going to be a little bit of continuity there between players. So I do think Edmonton, I'm pretty comfortable with them at number 5.
Yeah, if they hit on the free agents, they could be a good team. I don't think they can be a great team, but they could definitely be a good team.
For number 4, this is where I'm putting our Toronto Argonauts. I would love to put them higher, but it's just not possible given that we have so many unanswered questions. On paper, I think this team looks like a top 1-2 team. I think the roster is so strong up and down, but they lack continuity. The coaching staff is unproven and very new. We don't really know for sure what we're going to get in terms of quarterback play out of Nick Arbuckle. And I just don't think with all those questions, you can go any higher than 4. So they're at 4 for me on the strength of the roster, but I'm preventing them from being in the top 3 because of the lack of continuity and the lack of history and evidence that we can point to with regards to the quarterback play and the coaching staff.
I went back and forth on that too. I think that I wanted to have, I thought about putting Toronto top 3. I think for sure Toronto is a top 3 talent team in the league. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. If you look at how Toronto has improved across the board at every position. If you look at other teams off seasons, they've improved their secondary, or they've improved their wide receiver, or they may have improved their linebackers. But that's usually it. Toronto has improved every single positional group on the field. The only reason I don't have Toronto higher, I agree with you here at 4, is respect to the teams that did it in 2019 and the question marks that we still have. So to put them 4, I think, is already a tip of the hat to them. I think anything more than that is probably moving into fanboy territory. To that end, the team that I debated back and forth, number 3, I have your defending Grey Cup champion Winnipeg Blue Bombers, coached by former Argo legend Mike O'Shea. This was a team that on paper is not as good as Toronto. They have not added anything to make you feel like this is going to be a powerhouse offense or a powerhouse defense. They lost La Police to Ottawa, and Buck Pierce is now the offensive coordinator. But I love their continuity. I mean, I'm a Mike O'Shea fan. I think he's a hell of a coach. I like their continuity, and I think the defending champions deserve the respect of being seen as number 3 here. They haven't lost enough players to make me feel like this is a team that cannot be competitive, and in a season where there's not going to be a lot of training camp, there's not going to be a lot of practice time. I think a returning champ with a team that knows its program, there is an advantage there for them.
I think if this team had not won the Grey Cup in 2019, I could see me having put them at 6, 7,
that's a great
somewhere
point
down there. Because you look at the team, and maybe they haven't had a whole overhaul anywhere, but they've had pieces chipped off of them. Like their defense, you've got Winston Rose, who's playing with the Bengals. You've got Craig Rowe, who I don't think has signed with anyone to this point. Drake Nevis is with the Argonauts. Chris Humes with the Argonauts. Coaching staff, we've got Coach Young coming back from being the linebackers coach in Winnipeg to now defensive coordinator in Toronto, Paul LaPolice in Ottawa. There's just lots of little pieces that have been chipped off. And let's look at what they were before they went on that Grey Cup run where they got hot. They were an 11-7 team. They finished 3rd in the West. And they're the only team not named Ottawa that the Argos beat in 2019. So yes, they've got key pieces coming back. They've got a lot of depth across the board. But I don't know. I think 3 is generous, but I think being the defending Grey Cup champions, I think you have to give them the nod. I love Coach O'Shea. I don't think anyone should ever bet against him either. So I have them at 3, but I'm ready to abandon that if they get off to a slow start, because I'm not sure they are anywhere close to the talent level of the rest of these top 4.
Agreed.
Moving on to number 2. I have the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
Oh.
Partly because I couldn't stomach putting them at 1, and I suspected that you might, so I really wanted to establish this order so that I could have them at 2 instead of 1.
I did, to my eternal shame, have them at 1.
Well, I'm glad that I was able to step in and veto that for you, or blackball them off of that number 1 position. So the reason I have Hamilton at 2, partly because I hate them, but I've got some things to back me up here. So there's no question they're a great team. They've got the most proven talent in the league. They've got a tremendous amount of depth at just about every position. Like Larry Dean was a loss, but they've done pretty well at keeping everybody else, including their coaching staff. And the only reason I can justify them not being at number 1 is this, and it's a really important point. They are not capable of winning the Grey Cup. They are the only team this century that has not won the Grey Cup in the CFL. It has been now going on 22 years, and that is clearly in their heads. They should have won last year. They were a far better team than Winnipeg last year. and they were never even in that game. It is so in their heads that I don't think there's any chance at all the Hamilton Tiger Cats win the Grey Cup this year. And for that reason alone, I think that keeps them off the number one spot. But I can't argue with the roster. I can't argue with the coaching staff. I just don't think at the end of the day they're going to get it done.
Even with adding a fullback tight end?
Yes, and their first overall pick but that shows you, like, again, as much as we knock Hamilton for their draft picks, it shows you their confidence in their roster. The fact that they're looking at it, they're like, look, we've got a Grey Cup roster here. Is there anyone in this draft that could even get on the field at all for us? And the only answer was, well, let's draft a tight end who can maybe play an H-back role. Maybe he can start in some goal line situations.
I would say they have maintained their roster better than anyone in the league.
Agreed.
And their roster was very good. So I think while they haven't made any huge splashes, they didn't need to. That's going to be, again, going back to this, continuity. This is going to be a team that's ready to roll. They don't need to learn new systems, new language, new ways of doing things. This team's going to be ready to roll from the get-go. And I think that they're going to, it's going to be a problem for Ottawa and Toronto early to run into Hamilton, who are, a year and a half ahead of them in prep.
Yeah, I don't want to play Hamilton in the first 6 weeks of the season, and I don't think anyone does. I would not be surprised to see the Tiger Cats start out 6-0, and it take that amount of time for everyone else to get on the same page. But at the end of the day, someone will be the Grey Cup champion, and it won't be the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So that's why they're number 2.
Well, moving on to number 1, I guess what you've left me with is who I had at 2, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And they are, they were 13-5 in 2019. Coaching staff is back. They have a lot of talent. They added a couple of really great offensive linemen in Evan Johnson and Brett Boyko. Larry Dean is I know we talked about him for the Argos. I'm excited about Larry Dean. They added Micah Johnson. This was a team that was loaded in 2019, and I feel that they've gotten stronger. Now, they did lose their linebacking core, so that's an interesting choice for the franchise, that basically they're okay with the linebacker core leaving and plugging new guys in. Other than that sort of hole, Saskatchewan is ready to roll in the same way that Hamilton is. I think that those are clearly the top 2 teams and will be formidable in the first month of the season.
And you look at the pieces that we took from them, because we did take a number of Rough Riders in Philip Blake, Darius Bladek.
Charleston Hughes.
Charleston Hughes, right. I forgot about Charleston Hughes. And
that's the question. I think that I love Hughes being in Toronto. I love that he has one more year to give. Saskatchewan made a decision, that they felt like they were going to move on, and they brought in Micah Johnson. So I can't knock that from a kind of objective football argument. That's a nice move by them, I think.
And Cameron Judge, of course, as well. But I think when I looked up and down their roster and preparing for this piece, I was sort of vaguely aware of the moves they had made, but I was expecting to see far more holes than there were, because I was aware of the pieces that we got. Those 2 offensive linemen, the defensive lineman, the linebacker,
Coach McAdoo.
And the thing is, Coach McAdoo, he was their offensive coordinator. He was calling plays last year, and yet they've done a really nice job of filling every single hole. And they were 13-5 last year. I don't see anything in here to tell me their record will be anything short of that. So I'm really happy to have Saskatchewan at number 1. Partly because they deserve to be there, and partly because they don't wear black and gold.
And they're the class of the West. If you look at the West, Calgary is thinner. Edmonton is rebuilding. BC is not very good. There's no reason for Saskatchewan not to eat early and often.
So there you have it. Ottawa at number 9, BC at 8, Montreal 7, Calgary 6, Edmonton 5, Toronto 4, Winnipeg 3, Hamilton 2, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders in at number 1. There is our first power ranking of the year. We will see how this looks mid-season. This could be entirely upside down. It always is. You know, you never know what's going to happen until the season gets underway. But yeah, we gave it our best, and I feel pretty good about our list. That actually wasn't anywhere close to the disaster I thought it might be. We were mostly on the same page, I think, really, other than Saskatchewan, Hamilton, and maybe we had Edmonton flipped in there too. But yeah, mostly I think we saw it the same way. So kudos for us for having a little bit of chemistry there. Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Please rate, subscribe, tell every Argos fan you know about us. For JB, my name's Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.